This story is inspired by real-life situations and includes fictional elements for entertainment. Not recommended for viewers under 18.
On the surface, Daniel Harper's life looked exactly the way success was supposed to look in Chicago. An elegant condo, a respected career in corporate law, and a wife whose smile once felt like the safest place in the world. But sometimes, the quietest homes hide the loudest secrets. Like a phone lighting up at midnight with a name that shouldn't matter, or a silence between two people that grows heavier every night. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the evening he walked into his own bedroom and started packing would be the moment everything carefully hidden inside his marriage finally began to surface. And if stories about love, betrayal, and the fragile truths behind closed doors speak to you, stay a little longer. Some secrets deserve to be told slowly. The Chicago skyline glowed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harper condo, the lights reflecting softly across the polished kitchen island. Daniel Harper stood alone in the living room, loosening his tie after a 12-hour day at the law firm. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender candles, Olivia's favorite, and the quiet hum of traffic far below drifted through the glass like distant ocean waves. For a moment, everything looked normal. The framed photos along the hallway wall still told the story everyone believed. Weekend trips, Christmas dinners with friends, a summer photo near Lake Michigan where Olivia leaned against him, her smile wide and effortless. Daniel used to believe that smile meant something permanent. Now he wasn't so sure. He placed his briefcase down and glanced toward the bedroom. The soft sound of the shower running meant Olivia was home early tonight. That surprised him. For the past 3 months, late meetings had become routine. Daniel walked toward the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water. Olivia's phone lay on the marble counter, its screen dark. She must have forgotten it when she went to shower. He wasn't the kind of man who checked his wife's phone. At least, he hadn't been. The screen suddenly lit up. A message. Daniel didn't intend to look, not really, but the glow caught his eye before he could stop himself. A name appeared across the screen. Ethan Cole. Daniel frowned slightly. The name sounded familiar, though he couldn't immediately place it. Then the message preview appeared beneath it. Last night meant more than you think. The word stayed there for only a few seconds before the screen dimmed again. But the silence in the apartment had changed. Daniel stood perfectly still. His mind searched desperately for explanations that felt safer than the ones slowly forming. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe Ethan was a colleague. Maybe last night referred to some marketing event or company dinner. But something inside him, the quiet instinct people develop after years of loving someone, whispered a different truth. The shower turned off. Daniel placed the glass down carefully, exactly where it had been. When Olivia walked into the kitchen a moment later, her damp hair falling over one shoulder, she smiled the same familiar smile he had known for 12 years. "Hey," she said casually, "you're home early." Daniel studied her face. For the first time in a long time, he realized how easy it was to hide things behind a smile. "Traffic was light," he replied calmly. Olivia opened the refrigerator, pulling out a bottle of white wine. "You want some?" she asked. "Maybe later." She poured herself a glass, leaning casually against the counter. "You look tired," she added. "Rough day?" Daniel nodded slowly. "You could say that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched between them, delicate but heavy. Then Olivia's phone buzzed again on the counter. Her eyes flicked toward it quickly, too quickly. She grabbed the phone almost instinctively, glancing at the screen before turning it face down beside her wine glass. Daniel noticed the small movement, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided meeting his eyes. "Work?" he asked. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just a client thing." Daniel nodded. He didn't ask another question. But something inside him had already begun shifting slowly, quietly, like ice cracking beneath still water. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it begins with a single message on a quiet evening, and a husband who suddenly realizes he may not know his wife at all. 3 weeks passed without a single confrontation. If anyone had asked Olivia Harper how her marriage was doing, she would have smiled the same easy smile she had perfected over the years. Busy, she might say, but good. Daniel made sure of that. From the outside, nothing had changed. They still ate dinner together when their schedules aligned. They still attended a charity event one Saturday night in River North, where Olivia laughed easily among colleagues and Daniel shook hands with strangers who admired his work in corporate law. They still slept in the same bed. But Daniel had started noticing things he had never noticed before. Small things, patterns. It began with Olivia's schedule. Her company, Bright Arc Marketing, a rising tech-focused agency, had recently secured a major round of investment funding. Daniel remembered the excitement in Olivia's voice weeks earlier when she first mentioned the deal. "It could change everything for us," she had said. At the time, Daniel thought she meant the company. Now he wondered if she meant something else entirely. One evening, Daniel sat alone at his office desk on the 38th floor of a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. Most of the other lawyers had already left for the night. His laptop screen glowed quietly in the dim office. A search page. Ethan Cole. Daniel pressed enter. Within seconds, articles appeared. Photos, profiles. Ethan Cole was not just a colleague. He was the founder of Cole Ventures, one of the most aggressive venture capital firms in the Midwest. 42 years old. Former Stanford MBA. Known for investing in early-stage tech companies and transforming them into billion-dollar acquisitions. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. Bright art marketing appeared in several of the articles. 6 months ago, Co Ventures had led a 40 million investment round in Olivia's company. Daniel stared at a photo attached to one of the interviews. Ethan Cole stood beside a group of executives during a press event. Tall, relaxed confidence. The kind of man who knew exactly how much influence he carried in any room. And next to him, smiling at the cameras, stood Olivia. Daniel hadn't attended that event. She had told him it was just another company thing. He noticed something else in the photograph. Ethan's hand rested lightly against Olivia's back. It might have meant nothing, but Daniel now understood something he hadn't before. Ethan wasn't just someone sending late-night messages. He was someone with the power to shape Olivia's career. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. Outside the office windows, Chicago traffic moved like slow rivers of light through the dark streets. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Olivia. Running late tonight. Investor dinner. Don't wait up. Daniel stared at the message for several seconds. Investor dinner. He wondered if Ethan Cole was sitting across from her right now. He imagined the two of them at some expensive restaurant in the West Loop. Olivia leaning forward slightly as she spoke the way she always did when she wanted to persuade someone. The same warmth in her voice. The same eyes Daniel once believed only belonged to him. Daniel typed a reply. Okay, drive safe. He pressed send. Across the room, the office felt unusually quiet. Humiliation is a strange emotion. It rarely arrives with anger first. Instead, it begins with a quiet disbelief. A voice inside your head asking the same question over and over. Is this really happening? Daniel stood and walked to the window. Far below, headlights streamed across the bridges. Somewhere in the city, his wife was having dinner with the man whose name now sat heavily in Daniel's mind. He wondered when it had started. The message said last night, but Daniel suspected the truth was older than that. Affairs rarely begin the night they are discovered. They begin with glances, private jokes, late meetings that feel slightly too personal. Daniel exhaled slowly. He realized something in that moment. If Olivia was hiding this, she believed he would never look closely enough to see it. The thought stung more than the betrayal itself, because it meant she no longer feared losing him. Daniel turned away from the window. For the first time since reading that message weeks earlier, he opened a drawer of his desk and pulled out a small leather notebook. Inside it, he began writing. Dates, times, late meetings, trips, messages, not because he wanted revenge, but because somewhere deep inside him, Daniel Harper had begun preparing for a future where his marriage no longer existed. And the quiet man Olivia believed she understood was starting to become someone else entirely. Daniel Harper had spent most of his adult life believing that problems could be solved through clarity. Contracts defined expectations. Evidence revealed truth. The law, at least in theory, rewarded patience and preparation over emotion. Marriage, he was beginning to realize, followed none of those rules. It was late October when Daniel finally spoke to someone about Olivia. The conversation didn't happen in his office. It happened in a quiet bar tucked beneath a row of brick buildings in Lincoln Park, a place where attorneys from nearby firms often gathered after long days arguing other people's problems in court. Rain tapped gently against the windows as Daniel slid into a booth across from Michael Lawson, a former law school classmate who now specialized in family law. Michael studied Daniel for a moment before speaking. You look like a man who's either about to ask for legal advice, he said dryly, or confess to a crime. Daniel managed a faint smile. Legal advice. That's usually worse. The bartender dropped 2 glasses of bourbon on the table. Michael lifted his immediately. So, he said, leaning back, what happened? Daniel hesitated. For weeks, the truth had existed only inside his own head, quiet, controlled, carefully contained. Saying it out loud felt like breaking something fragile. My wife, Daniel said finally. I think she's having an affair. Michael didn't react dramatically. Family lawyers rarely did. Instead, he asked a question that mattered. Think, he repeated, or no? Daniel slid his phone across the table. The screen showed a photograph Daniel had saved from the press event weeks earlier. Olivia smiling beside Ethan Cole. Michael studied the image briefly. Investor guy, he asked. Yeah. Michael whistled softly. Cole Ventures, he muttered. That's not small money. Daniel nodded. She works for a company they funded. Michael took a slow sip of bourbon. Do you have proof? Not yet. Michael set the glass down. Then listen carefully, he said. If this turns into a divorce, and I'm not saying it will, you don't confront her until you understand the full situation. Daniel already knew that, but hearing someone else say it made the decision feel colder, more real. You document everything, Michael continued. Dates, trips, messages if you can. Anything that shows a pattern. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and placed the small leather notebook on the table. Michael raised an eyebrow. You've already started? Daniel nodded once. For a moment neither man spoke. Outside, a car splashed through rainwater on the street. Do you want to leave her? Michael asked quietly. Daniel stared down at the notebook. The question had been sitting silently in his mind for weeks. I don't know, he admitted. Michael studied him carefully. Then don't rush anything. Daniel exhaled slowly. Across the city, Olivia was probably finishing another late dinner with co-workers or investors or Ethan. The thought didn't produce the anger Daniel had expected. Instead, it created something colder: distance. When Daniel returned home later that night, the condo lights were still on. Olivia sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when he entered. "Hey," she said, "you're out late." "Work," Daniel replied calmly. She smiled faintly. "Same." Daniel placed his coat over the chair. "Investor meetings again?" he asked casually. Olivia nodded. "Big quarter coming up." Her tone sounded rehearsed. Daniel wondered how long she had been practicing it. He walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, feeling her eyes follow him briefly before returning to the glow of her phone screen. The same phone that sometimes lit up with Ethan's name. Olivia didn't know about the notebook. She didn't know about the conversation in the Lincoln Park bar. She didn't know that every late meeting and unexplained message was quietly becoming part of a timeline Daniel was building piece by piece. Instead, she continued living inside the comfortable illusion that her secret remained untouched. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at her across the room. For a moment, he remembered the woman he had fallen in love with 12 years earlier. The woman who used to laugh too loudly at movies and insisted on late-night drives along Lakeshore Drive. He wondered if she still existed somewhere inside the stranger sitting on their couch. Then, Olivia's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it quickly. A small smile appeared before she could hide it. Daniel felt something inside him settle into place. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The slow, deliberate realization that sometimes the end of a marriage doesn't begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins with silence, and the man quietly preparing for the moment he finally walks away. The decision did not arrive with thunder. There was no dramatic realization, no sudden explosion of anger. For Daniel Harper, it came on a quiet Thursday evening in early November, during the kind of cold Chicago night when the wind curled around buildings and rattled the glass of high-rise windows. Daniel unlocked the door to the condo at 7:12 p.m. The apartment was empty. Olivia had texted earlier that afternoon. Dinner with investors tonight. Might be late. Daniel stood in the entryway for a moment, listening to the silence of the place that had once felt like home. The city lights shimmered beyond the windows. Traffic drifted along the streets below. Everything looked exactly the same, but Daniel knew something fundamental had already changed. He walked down the hallway toward the bedroom. Inside the closet, he pulled out a medium-sized black suitcase they had once used for a weekend trip to Napa Valley. He placed it on the bed. For a moment, he simply stared at it. Then he opened it. The sound of the zipper sliding across the fabric echoed softly in the quiet room. Daniel moved slowly, methodically. 3 dress shirts, a pair of jeans, a navy sweater Olivia had once said made him look younger. He folded everything carefully, the same way he always packed for business trips. Except this wasn't a trip, it was an exit. In the kitchen, Daniel placed his leather notebook into his briefcase, the one filled with dates and quiet observations, the timeline of a marriage that had slowly unraveled while neither of them admitted it out loud. At 8 p.m., the front door opened. Olivia stepped inside, shaking the coat from her coat. "Daniel?" she called casually. He didn't answer. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she walked down the hallway. Then she reached the bedroom doorway and stopped. The suitcase sat open on the bed, half-filled. Daniel stood beside it, folding another shirt. For a moment, Olivia simply stared, as if her brain needed several seconds to process what she was seeing. Then confusion sharpened into alarm. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded. Daniel didn't look up immediately. He finished folding the shirt and placed it neatly inside the suitcase. Only then did he turn toward her. "I'm packing." Olivia let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Yeah, I can see that," she said. "Why?" Daniel met her eyes. "For a while now," he said calmly, "I've been trying to decide if I was imagining things." Olivia's expression tightened slightly. "Imagining what?" Daniel walked past her toward the dresser. "Late meetings," he said, "investor dinners, trips that somehow never appear on the company calendar." Olivia's face changed again. The confidence usually carried like armor flickered for a moment. "You're being paranoid," she said quickly. Daniel opened the drawer and removed the watch. "I looked him up," he said quietly. The room felt suddenly smaller. Olivia's voice dropped. "Looked who up?" Daniel placed the watch carefully into the suitcase. "Ethan Cole." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to touch. Olivia's eyes widened just slightly, only slightly, but Daniel saw it, and that was enough. "You went through my phone?" she asked. Her tone had shifted, now defensive, almost angry. Daniel shook his head. "No," he said. "Your phone lit up on the counter that night." Olivia crossed her arms. "So you read a message and suddenly decided on cheating?" Daniel studied her face. For weeks he had imagined this moment, the confrontation, the truth finally spilling out. Instead, what he saw was something else. Calculation. She was trying to determine how much he actually knew. "I didn't decide anything," Daniel said quietly. "I waited." Olivia scoffed. "For what?" Daniel reached into his briefcase and pulled out the leather notebook. He placed it gently on the bed beside the suitcase. "For patterns." Olivia looked at the notebook, then back at him. "You've been spying on me?" Daniel sighed softly. "No." He met her eyes again. "I've been watching my marriage disappear." The words hung in the air between them. For the first time since entering the room, Olivia looked genuinely shaken. "You're overreacting," she insisted. Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Am I?" He walked toward the bedroom window, the city lights reflecting faintly in the glass. Behind him, Olivia spoke again. "What exactly do you think is going on?" Daniel didn't turn around. "I think," he said slowly, "that my wife has been having dinner with the same man 3 nights a week." A long pause. "And I think," he continued quietly, "that those dinners don't always end at a restaurant." Olivia's breathing had become noticeably uneven. "That's not—" She stopped herself. The unfinished sentence said more than the words would have. Daniel finally turned back toward her. For the first time all evening, his voice carried a hint of something sharper. "Here's the strange part," he said. "I wasn't even angry at first." Olivia stared at him. "Then what were you?" Daniel looked at the suitcase on the bed. "Tired." The word landed heavier than shouting ever could, because beneath it lived something worse than anger. Resignation. And for the first time since their marriage began quietly falling apart, Olivia Harper realized she might already be too late to stop it. The bedroom felt smaller than it had ever felt before. Chicago's skyline still glowed through the window, but the city outside seemed distant now, like something happening in another life. Olivia stood near the doorway, her arms still crossed, but the defensive certainty she had worn earlier was beginning to fracture. Daniel waited. He had spent weeks imagining this conversation, but now that it had finally arrived, he realized something strange. He didn't want to interrogate her. He wanted to understand how two people could live side by side for years and still end up here. Olivia broke the silence first. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked quietly, glancing toward the suitcase. Daniel leaned against the dresser. "A few weeks," he said. Her eyes moved toward the leather notebook. "And the spying?" "I told you," Daniel replied calmly. "I wasn't spying. You were writing down my life like evidence." Daniel didn't argue, because in a way, that was exactly what he had been doing. Olivia exhaled slowly and walked deeper into the room. The heels she had worn to dinner clicked softly against the floor. "You could have just asked me," she said. Daniel looked at her carefully. "Would you have told me?" She didn't answer. The silence between them stretched long enough to become its own answer. Olivia rubbed her forehead, suddenly looking far more tired than she had when she walked through the door. "This isn't as simple as you think," she said quietly. Daniel let out a small breath. "That's usually what people say when it's exactly as simple as it looks." Olivia's eyes flashed. "I'm serious." Daniel waited. She paced slowly toward the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. "Yes," she said finally. "I've been seeing Ethan." The words hung in the air. No dramatic music, no shouting, just a sentence that quietly ended 12 years of certainty. Daniel absorbed it with surprising calm. "How long?" he asked. Olivia hesitated. 3 months. Daniel nodded once. That matched his notebook almost perfectly. "And the message?" he asked. Olivia looked down. "That was after a conference in New York." Daniel studied her. "You didn't deny it." Olivia shook her head. "There's no point now." For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked directly at him without defense. "You want the truth?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Yes." Olivia leaned against the window frame. "It didn't start as an affair." Daniel said nothing. "At first he was just an investor," she continued. "He was around the office a lot after the funding deal. Meetings, strategy sessions." Daniel recognized the pattern immediately. The beginning always sounded harmless. "He believed in the company," Olivia said, "more than anyone else did." "And that mattered," Daniel said quietly. "Yes." She looked at him again. "You know how brutal that industry is. Every quarter, you're expected to prove you deserve the job you have." Daniel understood ambition. He lived inside it every day at the firm. "But ambition doesn't require sleeping with investors," he said calmly. Olivia winced slightly. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Olivia hesitated. Then she said something Daniel hadn't expected. "It was easy." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" She looked at him carefully. Talking to him didn't feel like work. Daniel felt something twist faintly in his chest. "And talking to me did?" he asked. Olivia's silence lasted several seconds. Finally she spoke. "Sometimes, yes." The honesty landed harder than the confession itself. Daniel looked away toward the city lights. "For the past few years," Olivia continued quietly, "we've been living like partners in a project." Daniel didn't interrupt. "We schedule dinners, we talk about work, we host people and smile for pictures." She paused. "But we stopped actually seeing each other a long time ago." Daniel let the words settle. He hated how much truth he could hear inside them. "So Ethan filled that space," he said. Olivia nodded slowly. "At first it was just conversation," she said. "Someone asking me how I was instead of what the company's numbers looked like." Daniel's voice was calm, but colder now. "And eventually, that turned into hotel rooms." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." The honesty hurt, but strangely, Daniel felt something else beneath the pain. Recognition. Because somewhere inside him, he had known their marriage had been drifting for years. The late nights at work, the conversations that stayed safely on the surface. Two people slowly becoming strangers while still sharing the same address. Daniel looked at the suitcase again. "So what happens now?" Olivia asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. For the first time all night, uncertainty appeared in his expression, because Olivia had just said something he couldn't ignore. Their marriage hadn't been destroyed in 3 months. It had been breaking long before Ethan Cole ever walked into the picture. The question now was whether anything real still remained beneath the damage, and Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to find out. 3 days after the night of the suitcase, Olivia Harper walked into the glass headquarters of Brightark Marketing, feeling like every pair of eyes in the building had already heard something she hadn't. It was probably paranoia, or maybe it wasn't. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor felt longer than usual. 2 junior analysts stood beside her, whispering about a campaign deadline. When Olivia stepped out, they stopped mid-sentence. "Morning," Olivia said, her tone calm and professional. "Morning," one of them replied quickly. They avoided looking directly at her. Olivia walked toward her office, heels steady against the polished floor, her posture perfectly composed. Inside, she closed the glass door and exhaled slowly. Her inbox was already overflowing. Meeting requests, budget approvals, a dozen internal messages. But one email sat at the top of the screen with a subject line that made her stomach tighten. Executive Strategy Meeting, 10:30 a.m. The sender was Nathan Wallace, Brightark CEO. Olivia leaned back in her chair, staring at the email. Nathan rarely called unscheduled executive meetings. Something had changed. Across the city, Daniel sat inside a quiet conference room at his law firm, reviewing contracts, but his focus kept drifting. He hadn't moved out yet. The suitcase still sat partially packed in the bedroom. Neither of them had touched it. Their conversations since that night had remained strangely polite. 2 adults navigating around the truth neither one fully understood how to resolve. Daniel checked his phone. No messages from Olivia. He wondered if Ethan Cole had sent one. Back at Brightark, Olivia entered the executive conference room precisely at 10:29. Nathan Wallace sat at the head of the table. 3 other executives were already there, and so was Ethan Cole. Olivia felt her pulse quicken slightly, but kept her expression neutral. "Morning," she said as she took a seat. Nathan nodded, but didn't smile. Ethan met her eyes for only a fraction of a second before looking down at the documents in front of him. The room felt tense. Nathan cleared his throat. "I'm going to keep this direct," he said. He slid a printed article across the table. Olivia looked down. It was a business book she recognized. The headline wasn't subtle. "Investor influence at Brightark. Is venture capital blurring the lines?" Olivia's chest tightened. Nathan continued. "There are rumors circulating," he said carefully, "that one of our executives has developed a personal relationship with someone connected to our funding partners." No one spoke. Olivia could feel the weight of the room pressing against her. Nathan looked directly at her now. "Olivia," he said quietly, "this article doesn't name you." He paused. "But people inside the company are talking." Ethan shifted slightly in his chair but said nothing. Olivia forced herself to remain calm. "This sounds like speculation," she said. Nathan leaned forward. "Speculation can still damage a company." The room remained silent. Nathan's voice softened slightly. "You're one of the most talented strategists we have," he said. "But Brightark just closed a $40 million investment round." His eyes moved briefly toward Ethan. "If people begin to believe that funding decisions are influenced by personal relationships, the board will have concerns." The meaning was clear. This wasn't just about gossip. It was about credibility, about whether Olivia's success would now be questioned. Across the table, Ethan finally spoke. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said evenly. Nathan gave him a measured look. "That's exactly what investors hate," Nathan replied. "Conclusions they can't control." Olivia felt the ground shifting beneath her carefully built career. For years she had fought to be taken seriously in an industry that often doubted women in leadership. Now everything she had built could be reduced to one rumor, one relationship, one mistake. The meeting ended 20 minutes later with no clear resolution. But Olivia understood the message. Her personal life had just become a corporate liability. That evening, when she returned to the condo, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of water. He looked up as she walked in. "You're home early," he said. Olivia placed her purse down slowly. "Work was complicated today." Daniel studied her face. "What happened?" For a moment, Olivia considered lying. Then she sat down across from him. "People at the company are starting to talk," she said quietly. Daniel didn't look surprised. "About Ethan?" Olivia nodded. Daniel leaned back slightly. "And the investors?" "They're worried." Daniel absorbed this calmly. Olivia watched him carefully. "You don't seem shocked," she said. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. "Affairs have consequences," he said quietly. Olivia lowered her gaze. "Yes." Outside the windows, Chicago traffic flowed endlessly through the night. Inside the condo, the silence between them felt heavier than ever. Because for the first time since the truth came out, Olivia was beginning to understand something Daniel had already realized. Secrets rarely stay contained. Eventually they leak into every corner of a life. And when they do, the damage spreads far beyond the people who created them. The suitcase was still on the bed. 4 days had passed since the confrontation, and neither Daniel nor Olivia had moved it. It sat there like a quiet witness, half packed, half abandoned, representing a decision that had not yet been made. Daniel stood in the bedroom doorway that Sunday morning, looking at it. Outside, the grey November sky hung low over Chicago. Wind rattled softly against the windows, carrying the distant noise of traffic along Lakeshore Drive. Olivia was in the kitchen. He could hear the soft clink of a coffee mug against the counter. For 12 years, mornings had followed a predictable rhythm between them. Coffee brewing, the low murmur of news playing on the television. Olivia sometimes scrolling through her phone while Daniel skimmed legal briefings for the day ahead. Today there was no television, no casual conversation, only silence. Daniel walked into the kitchen. Olivia sat at the counter in an oversized sweater, her hair loosely tied back. A laptop sat open in front of her, but the screen had gone dark. She looked up when he entered. "Morning," she said softly. Daniel poured himself coffee. "Morning." He sat across from her. For a moment they simply watched the steam rise from their cups. It was Olivia who spoke first. "I met with Nathan again yesterday," she said. Daniel remembered the CEO's name from their previous conversation. "And?" "They're investigating the rumors." Daniel nodded slowly. Olivia's voice carried a quiet exhaustion. "If the board thinks my relationship with Ethan influenced the investment deal," she stopped herself. Daniel finished the sentence for her. "You could lose your job." Olivia nodded once. Neither of them spoke for a few seconds. Finally, Daniel asked, "Are you still seeing him?" Olivia didn't look away. "No." Daniel studied her expression. "Did you end it?" he asked, "or did he?" Olivia hesitated before answering. "I did." Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. "Because of your job?" Olivia met his eyes. "No," she said quietly. "Because of this." She gestured faintly toward the apartment around them, toward the life they had built together. Daniel absorbed that without reacting. "Do you believe that changes anything?" he asked. Olivia's voice softened. "I don't know." She closed the laptop slowly. "But I know the last few years of our marriage weren't working." Daniel almost smiled at the understatement. "That's one way to describe it." Olivia folded her hands together on the counter. "Do you remember the last vacation we took without checking email every hour?" she asked. Daniel thought about it. "It took longer than it should have. Probably Napa," he said finally. "That was 5 years ago," Olivia replied. Daniel felt a quiet weight settle in his chest. 5 years. Half a decade of slow emotional distance neither of them had fully acknowledged. Olivia continued speaking, her voice calmer now. "Somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners," she said. "We became two people managing the same household." Daniel couldn't argue with that. He had felt it too. The polite conversations, the careful schedules, the absence of anything resembling vulnerability. "But affairs don't fix broken marriages," Daniel said quietly. "I know. And they usually finish destroying them." Olivia nodded slowly. "Yes." The honesty in her voice surprised him again. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, a siren echoed faintly through the city streets. Finally, Olivia asked the question Daniel knew was coming. "Are you going to leave?" Daniel looked toward the hallway, toward the bedroom where the suitcase waited. "I talked to a lawyer," he said. Olivia's shoulders tensed slightly. "I assumed you had." Daniel rubbed his hands together slowly. "I was ready to file for divorce." The words hung between them. Olivia didn't interrupt. Daniel continued, "But then something you said that night stuck with me." She looked up. "What?" Daniel met her eyes. "That we stopped seeing each other a long time ago." Olivia's expression softened slightly. Daniel looked down at the coffee in his cup. "Maybe Ethan wasn't the beginning of the problem," he said quietly. "Maybe he was just where it finally showed up." Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. "So what does that mean?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "I don't know yet." He stood and walked toward the window. Chicago stretched endlessly beneath the gray sky. For weeks he had believed the answer was simple. Pack the suitcase, leave, end the marriage before it collapsed completely. But now the truth felt more complicated. Because beneath the betrayal lived something harder to face. Two people who had slowly stopped fighting for each other. Daniel turned back toward her. "I'm not promising anything," he said carefully. Olivia waited. "But before I decide whether to end this marriage," Daniel continued, "I think we owe each other one real conversation." "About what?" Olivia asked. Daniel held her gaze. "About whether there's anything left here worth saving." The question hung quietly in the air between them. Not hopeful, not hopeless, just honest. And for the first time since the suitcase appeared on the bed, neither of them knew what the answer would be. Spring arrived in Chicago slowly. The snow melted first, leaving behind streets streaked with grey salt and puddles reflecting the pale sky. Then the trees along the riverwalk began to show the faintest hints of green. 6 months had passed since the night Daniel Harper placed a suitcase on the bed. The condo no longer belonged to both of them. Daniel had moved into a smaller apartment in Old Town, a quiet place overlooking a narrow street lined with brick townhouses and small cafes. It wasn't as polished as the downtown high-rise he once shared with Olivia, but the space felt lighter somehow. Less curated, more honest. On a quiet Saturday morning, Daniel sat near the window with a cup of coffee and a stack of documents from the law firm spread across the table. Outside, people walked their dogs. A cyclist passed slowly along the sidewalk. Life moved forward in small, ordinary ways. The divorce had finalized 2 months earlier. The legal process itself had been surprisingly calm. No dramatic courtroom battles, no public conflict. Just signatures, paperwork. And two people acknowledging that the life they once built together had quietly reached its end. Dania had expected the final moment to feel heavier. Instead, it felt strangely quiet. Not relief exactly, but clarity. Across the city, Olivia Harper stood inside a conference room that no longer felt like her territory. Bright Art Marketing had survived the rumors, but not without consequences. The board had launched an internal review after the story about investor relationships began circulating through industry blogs. Nothing illegal had been proven, but reputations rarely survive intact once suspicion appears. Olivia had resigned 3 months earlier. Officially, it was described as a mutual transition. In reality, everyone understood what had happened. The affair with Ethan Cole had ended long before that. Not with anger. Not even with a dramatic breakup. Just distance. When the company investigation began, Ethan's venture firm quietly shifted its attention to other investments. Powerful men rarely stayed long where controversy lived. Now Olivia worked as an independent consultant, helping smaller startups develop marketing strategy. The job paid less, the office was smaller, but the pressure that once dominated her life had softened. Late that afternoon, Olivia walked along the Chicago Riverwalk, watching the slow movement of boats beneath the bridges. She hadn't seen Daniel in months. Their final conversation during the divorce proceedings had been brief and respectful. No accusations, no bitterness, just the quiet understanding that something meaningful had ended. As Olivia leaned against the railing, she found herself remembering small details from their marriage. Late-night pizza deliveries during their first apartment, road trips along Lake Michigan, the way Daniel used to read quietly beside her on Sunday mornings. Those memories no longer felt like wounds, but they carried a weight she would probably always feel. Across town, Daniel closed his laptop and stepped outside his apartment building. The evening air was warmer now, carrying the faint scent of spring rain. He walked toward a small cafe on the corner. Inside, the barista greeted him by name. It was a simple thing, but it reminded him that life continued to rebuild itself through ordinary routines. Daniel ordered coffee and sat near the window. For the first time in years, his future felt undefined, and strangely, that didn't frighten him. He thought briefly about Olivia. Not with anger, not even with regret. Just with the understanding that some relationships shape who you become even when they don't survive. The affair had not been the entire story. It had simply revealed what had already been breaking beneath the surface. Daniel lifted his coffee cup and looked out at the quiet street. Somewhere in the city, Olivia Harper was also beginning again. Two people who once believed their lives were permanently intertwined, now moving forward along separate paths. The collapse of their marriage had not destroyed them, but it had changed them, and sometimes that is the most honest ending a love story can have.